Hi students. Okay, so for today we are going to spend this lecture doing a series of case study questions focusing on macroeconomic data, right? So these are the questions that you'll see, the 2 marks, 3 marks question that you see right at the start of your case study. Okay, so before we start, please have your calculator with you. You can also download the slides of this video on Google Classroom. Okay, so that along the way, as you practice, you can just jot down the key points and then your workings as we go through the lesson. Okay, for this lesson to be effective, you really need to try out the questions by yourself first. So I will not incorporate wait time into the videos for you to do the question. So once the question is shown, you just pause the video, and then when you're ready, you just carry on to view the answers. Okay, so for this to work properly, you cannot just blindly copy the answers. So why do we want to do this video in the first place? I think firstly it's because along in the past few years we realized that students, the challenges they face when they come to questions needing them to deal with data is that they are unable to tell the difference between percentage changes and absolute changes. Later we have a bit of sensing of what this means. Some students also find it a challenge to manipulate the data mathematically. Now that being said, mathematical manipulation at the A levels for econs is relatively straightforward. It is not something that should be beyond you, and you should already have the necessary skills to do all this mathematical manipulation. Also, another thing that we find that students tend to face a challenge in is that they are not sensitive to the differences in the economic terms that sound similar, but actually they mean quite different things. So for example, inflation rate and general price level, right? Related to the same concept of price stability, but doesn't mean exactly the same thing. Similarly, economic growth and real national income will come to these different economic terms shortly. Okay, so let us begin on the first section. We are looking at economic growth and national income data. Okay, so for this first question, I need you to calculate the real GDP growth rates using the figures given. So once you're done, pause the video first. Once you're done, you can play the video again, right? So I'll pause 5 seconds here. Once you're ready, come back. All right, so for this question, relatively straightforward percentage calculation. So essentially it's new minus O over O to find the percentage. You learned this in primary school, so it should not be an issue for you. Okay, similarly on the right, we will see that the real GDP growth rate is negative 2.7%. So relatively straightforward calculation. This is what you need to be able to do. It's expected. It's not difficult mathematical manipulation. So what do we notice from this simple exercise? Okay, so firstly, you will see that a positive growth rate means that real GDP is increasing, is going up, whereas a negative growth rate means that real GDP is falling, right? From 370 to 360, it is falling. So negative shows that real GDP is falling, national income is falling. So the magnitude of the growth rate, 8.1 versus 2.7, it shows the extent of change in the real GDP. Okay, so you have to be careful. The positive and negative shows the direction in which real GDP is changing. The number, the magnitude, shows the extent of increase or decrease in the real GDP. Alright, so straightforward. This is straightforward. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so let's say you look at this question, right? Describe the trend in real GDP from 2018 to 2020, right? So simple question analysis. When you say describe, usually we are looking for a general trend plus a refinement. Right, this refinement depends on the question. It could be a counter trend, it could be a different extent of changes. It really depends on the question. So try for this question, what would be a general trend and refinement? So pause the video first. Once you're ready, come back. Alright, so for this question, there's a trick here. The question asks for real GDP, but the data given is real GDP growth. So you have to be careful. You cannot just directly read off the data. You have to understand how to manipulate the data to answer the question. So because all these are positive, essentially real GDP increased from 2018 to 2020, but at a decreasing rate. So the positive sign shows you that real income, real GDP is going up, but they are increasing at a slower rate. Right? So again, this is one of the challenge I explained to you earlier. You're not able to differentiate between absolute and relative changes, absolute changes as well as the percentage changes, absolute changes. So some students also are not perceptive to this difference between real GDP and real GDP growth. So an additional word here, especially when it comes to data question, makes a difference. All right, let's try the next one. So this data is given here. Let's try. So 2 questions. How will your answer differ for these 2 questions? So now you should be able to tell me or realize now there's a difference between real GDP and real GDP growth. Again, let's try it out. Once you're done, pause the video first. Once you're done, come back. Okay, so from the extract or from the table 2, we can see that these figures are percentage changes. So you have to realize that maybe for one of the question, 1 or 2, you may have to manipulate the data slightly. Okay, so for the first part, firstly, let's be careful. This is 2016 to 2019. Don't make the mistake of reading the whole thing. Maybe in this situation, it may not matter, but in some questions, it matters. Okay. So because the question is about real GDP, right? So the answer here is real GDP generally increase but at a decreasing rate. How do we know? Because why generally increase? Because it's all positive, right? It's the positive percentages. But why at a decreasing rate? Because the percentages are falling. Okay. So I hope you understand now the difference between real GDP absolute level and real GDP growth, which is a percentage term. Describe the change in real GDP growth, then this one is more straightforward because the question gives you percentages and the answer is in terms of growth too, right? So it's in terms of percentage. So you can say real GDP growth generally fell but increased. So this is the refinement, right? This part is the refinement, it's a counter trend. So it increased from 2006 to 2007. So you look at how the 2 answers differ. Alright, next question. State the year. So I just need you to state the year. Don't need to don't need to explain anything. Just state the year when real GDP is the lowest. Pause. Once you're ready, come back. Alright, and the year is 2018. Right? Some of you may, why 2018 is the biggest number, but it's not. Because 2018 GDP has been going up, real GDP has been going up. 2019 real GDP has been going up, it's also positive. 2020 real GDP has also been going up. So if it's consistently going up, the lowest point must be at the beginning. So 2018 is the year where real GDP is the lowest. Okay, this question is in Google form, so do try it out. We are interested to find out what your answer is, right? Again, this is slightly different from the earlier question because the data given is not the same. So be careful of the year also. Read the correct years, right? So once you're done, you can try out the questions in the Google form. Just click submit and then the answers will be shown to you at the end of the Google form, right? So that's all for the first section. Thank you.